Well, welcome everybody to today's Digital Humanities lecture. My name is Matt Kinservik. I'm an English professor and the Associate Dean for the Humanities, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's speakers. Before I do that, not to steal their thunder, I want to make sure that everybody sees that there are handouts in the back, and some of these are coming about the spring offerings, both in the lecture series and in the workshops. So the one I have in my hand right now actually is not at the moment on the back table, but it will be there momentarily, and it's got the spring lineup, so do take it and take a look at it. I'll just mention quickly that the next talk will be a March 6th talk. Kenny Cruz, the director of Columbia University's Copyright Advisory Office, will be here giving a talk on copyright in the digital humanities. Okay. So today we have the good fortune of having Catherine Rowe and Kristen Poole here to talk about iPad Shakespeares. Let me just tell you briefly a bit about the two of them, and then let them come up and talk at length about the project that they're engaged in. So Catherine Rowe is professor of English at Bryn Mawr College. She is the director of the Tri-College Digital Humanities Consortium, director of the Catherine Houghton Hepburn Center at Bryn Mawr, and also director of creative content. So she's a director of three things, and co-founder of Luminary Digital Media. And they'll both be talking more about what Luminary is. Catherine, like Kristen, is a Shakespeare scholar, does a lot of work on Shakespeare and adaptation. Her most recent book is New Wave Shakespeare on Screen, and her current project is a new book on new media adaptations of Shakespeare. Kristen is, of course, a University of Delaware professor of English, and Kristen is the director of Romeo and Juliet for Luminary Digital Media. She has recently published Supernatural Environments in Shakespeare's England, Spaces of Demonism, Divinity, and Drama, and is currently working on a book about early modern philosophies of reading. So that's who they are. I'm going to step away and let them come up here and walk us through the Luminary Digital Media Romeo and Juliet project. Thanks.
Oh, we do have the light on. How's the sound? Yes? Okay. Let's queue up here. As you saw, you may at any given moment see some social media in my life emerging, like an invitation from a student to come talk to me. That's what you just saw. We're going to be talking about The Tempest today, because Romeo and Juliet is still downstream for us, although I hope Kristen will talk a little bit about her thinking in the process of putting that project together. I've known Kristen since graduate school. We were at the same undergraduate institution together, and so it's been an incredible pleasure to be weaving this project together with somebody that I've known so long and thought with together about teaching, about reading, about writing for so long, and about Shakespeare. I'm thrilled to be here today. This is an incredibly exciting lecture series that you have set up, Matthew. We're going to talk and show off a little bit a reading app I developed. Can we do something about the feedback here, or is that just going to be... You're not hearing it? It's just me. Okay. About a reading app I developed with a colleague at Notre Dame, a Renaissance scholar also, Elliot Visconsi, and a team of experts, including scholar teachers such as Kristen Poole, secondary teachers, actors, directors, and editors. Shakespeare's The Tempest for iPad was launched by Luminary Digital Media, the small company Elliot and I founded to publish iPad editions that match what a literary teacher and a scholar wants an ebook to be. My aim this afternoon is to give you a sense of what motivates a humanist to become a maker and an entrepreneur. Our initial motivation was a keen sense of frustration about our field's inability to solve the audience problem in the humanities. I don't think we have a humanities crisis, but I do think that we have a crisis of audience. The second motivation was our sense of a growing breach between scholar teachers on the one hand and conventional publishing in our attempt to reach those audiences. We were moved to experiment with alternate ways to reach readers potentially interested in the difficult, satisfying texts that we study and teach. All right, let's bring it back up. There we go. We wanted to lower the difficulty of their first encounters and to find new genres for public scholarship. pedagogical context in which we work as Renaissance scholars also gave us a keen sense of the inadequacy of the current generation of ebooks for classroom use. And as a person who studied the history of the text, going back many centuries, I would call all of what we're going to be talking about today a period of incunable ebooks. In other words, these are very much practices and methods and formats, form factors in transition, and we're going to be living with that transition for a very long time, I think. But one of my messages today is that I think it should be the folks in this room who seize that process as much as we can. Much of it we can't change, but some small parts of it we can change, we can participate in, and maybe even direct. So some background. The software framework was developed at Notre Dame's Center for Research Computing, which used this project to grow and train an iOS development team to work with scholars under an internal grant for scholarly innovation projects. We launched the first publication, The Tempest, in April 2012, and then sought and won modest angel investment that has brought us to this current point with a framework that can stamp similar apps for other texts, and we hope for other teams of scholars. The app is in 23 countries in a score of high school and college classrooms this fall, and the response from students has been lively and very enthusiastic, and we'll talk about that a little bit downstream. We're exploring partnerships with just a few potential entities on the academic side and on the trade side. We launched in iOS, that is for the iPad, because that gave us a fairly large initial distribution system. But the goal is to expand to other mobile devices by the end of the year and become platform agnostic. What makes this possible and sustainable from a technical standpoint is that what sits behind the app is a database. In other words, the Tempest, the play, and the scholarly commentaries, and all the material that I'm going to show you right now exist as a database expressible as a page or a scrolling screen rather than the other way around. They don't begin as a page and then get coded in order for us to be able to store them and transmit them via database structures, the way many of our current digital corpora do. Elliot and I came to our collaboration and to the idea of building an app through similar paths. We're both early modernists who pursued an intensive period of mid-career retraining with the support of New Directions fellowships from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. His was in constitutional law and the history of the First Amendment. Mine was in media studies and media history. We're both scholars who work by habit and by pleasure and conviction at the edge of our own mastery, which is absolutely essential, I think, if you're a scholar who's going to go start to work with software developers. We work with text of a similar kind, large heritage corpora edited in successive generations for sale by academic and commercial publishers. And we were encountering similar phenomena in our classrooms at very different kinds of institutions. An increasing number of students using tablet devices, often as their primary device, because it's considerably cheaper than a laptop. An increasing number of students asking for e-texts and seeking sophistication in the way that they used e-texts. Both of us see the rapid pace of media change now as opportunities for highlighting the value of long-standing reading practices. And both of us teach comparatives courses, his on the history of the First Amendment, mine on the history of writing and reading technologies. We both read promiscuously. That is to say, we read on just about any device that we can get our hands on. And we were finding ourselves, like our students, more promiscuous rather than more settled as time went on, and in particular with the advent of tablet readers. And we were both in a state of intense frustration with our traditional publishers. I should say I have some amazing relationships with publishers and with editors in both scholarly and trade media, trade presses. But that those relationships weren't maturing to answer the kinds of questions that we felt really needed to be answered with the arrival of so many e-texts in our classrooms. The last thing I'd say was that for the first 6 months of intense collaboration, the period in which we're doing most of the design work for this app, our relationship developed entirely via electronic media. We met each other for about 15 minutes at an ADE meeting in San Francisco, in Palo Alto. And that was it. Then a phone call, and then the rest for about 6 months happened on social media: phone, Skype, email, text, and words with friends, which is pretty important. Our design principles grew out of shared frustrations with key aspects of the current state of incunable e-readers. First was their unsuitability to the set of humanist practices with which I began this talk, the readerly writing and writerly reading of handling a text that we do in the classroom and that constitutes textuality in any medium. Though one of the chief powers of electronic print is its manipulability. Traditional publishers, commercial and academic, have been slow to move their EPUB technologies and DRM practices, digital rights management practices, in that direction. Right? Most e-texts limit the superb capacity of manipulability of electronic text. Right? Second, the economic disincentives that have kept us at that state coincide with a model of knowledge that emphasizes solo cognition. What Ian Bogost would call the procedural rhetoric of e-readers is captured in the iconic One in a Tree brand of Kindle. That's a liberal arts brochure update of Jane Eyre and the Winter Seat, right? The single reader under the tree. Quote, made by means of a computer model, Bogost explains, a procedural rhetoric makes a claim about how something works by modeling its processes in the process-native environment of the computer, rather than using description, writing, or depiction, images. Even the most exciting of the new high-end app books model reading as a multimedia process of delivery and consumption, rather than of curation, co-curation, and social engagement. In a trenchant post at Flow TV in December, this past December, Mara Mills observed that reading is, quote, a sphere of activity like play. What that means is that in our most intensely social modes, we read as we play to collect companions who intensify that experience. So our design logic for the Luminary apps is social reading. Our goal is to bring the procedural rhetoric of the app to a place where it models the social constitution of knowledge via reading. This means that we view texts, including multimedia forms, both as gateways to social experience and exchange, and as social experiences in their own right. Even Jane Eyre reads to find companionship in a writer and in the writers that that writer reads. In other words, you may just be alone with the book, but that is a social experience. This logic dictated an array of annotation and social note-taking tools, with more planned as we iterate design. A common placing function we're calling MyPath for gathering passages under one's own heading. Easily exportable for papers or for sharing. And we wrote terms of service and privacy guidelines governing that co-created content that we would be happy to sign ourselves, claiming in that content only the rights necessary to represent it in the app as the reader chooses to do. All right, so let me give you a look at this. So our company is called Luminary. Our first title is Shakespeare's The Tempest. Shakespeare's The Tempest for iPad, which, as you've just seen, is available in the App Store. It took about 9 months to develop. An extraordinarily fast, for a scholar, intensive phase of development that was undertaken by Notre Dame. I had terrific support from Bryn Mawr, I should say, as well, and from our angel investors. We've taught with it in multiple classrooms, so I'm going to give you a few examples as I go about how students navigate this environment, and I think you'll hear some more about that from Kristen. So our first goal, as you can see, is to have a quiet reading experience, visually quiet reading experience. We make this customizable. It's as dynamic as you want it to be. You can open up more of the text as you go, but only when you want it. There's no immediate links out. You'll see that unlike a laptop, this environment is not immediately saying, here's what's going on my Facebook page. And students describe that form factor of the iPad as non-distracting, quiet, non-interrupting, as helping them sustain reading in a really satisfying way. They also like that it lies flat on the table the way a book does, rather than standing up as this does between us. All the usual resources are here for reading Shakespeare. I just showed you glosses. There's a little scene summary. There's a cast of characters, dramatis personae. There's also some significant improvements. You'll see this dynamic line counter there. I can type into it and instantly go where I want to go. But better than that, let's put this away, is that it tracks me. This is the thing that scholars have most loved. So you never have to count lines anymore. Those line counters on the right that tell you that you are at line 139 are automatically going to adjust at the top of the page with just a little bit of a lag as it locates itself. And I have loved that. We keep arguing about whether we'll keep those line markers on the side of the page. That's a discussion I'm happy to have if anyone's interested. We can, all of the basic iPad navigation capacities are here. You can copy, you can highlight, you can set a bookmark. You'll see that I've done quite a lot of bookmarks. Let me hop over to the entrance of Prosper and Miranda, for example. You can take notes. There's my bookmark sitting quietly right there. Let's go to my next one, because I think I have a note somewhere down here. Let's see. Must have cut it out. This is the edition that there's a note that I've been teaching with. Let's see what that note tells me. If it wants to open. Oh, where I'm about to do a production. I'm teaching a class in multilingual Shakespeare, and I'm thinking about what's happening with the confused noises there. We're going to be taking a team of players to an international Shakespeare festival in March. So we're just starting to begin to think where this play opens up possibilities for multilingual production. We're trying here to model a reading experience that is like that of the classroom. So there's also a rich array of commentaries built into this by experts. And I'm going to pop to this moment where Miranda comes in. Let me find that really quickly and show you a little bit of what it's like, the way that the commentaries by experts, which are running down the side of the screen here, you'll see that they're anchored to particular passages of the play. The way these model what it's like to be in conversation. Here's the wonderful scholar Harry Berger, one of the lions of the field, who drops into this moment and tells us Prosper is like someone who lost his job in Manhattan and was forced to raise his family on Long Island, where he lived in humiliation for 12 years without a kitchen sink until a Big Apple gave him another break. For Harry, this play is a revenge play, and his commentary stream will touch down as he goes in a really exciting but lightweight way on that theme. At the same moment, we have, let's see who else is writing about this, Kristen Poole, who's going to situate this play and this entry within the larger context of familial relationships in Shakespeare's works. And then we're going to go out a little bit further, if we want, to Ellen Mackay, who's going to situate this play and this moment in the context of castaway stories and those familial relationships in the larger frame of literary castaways, and so on. So that the sense is that at any given moment here, if you open up the spots where there are clusters of conversations, you'll hear multiple angles of vision on a particular moment. We also have Dale Rapley and Jennifer Kidd, the actors who play our full-text audio. I'm going to let Kristen talk a little bit about the audio, but the audio too here is attempting to convey that this is a polyvocal work. This is a work around which multiple voices convene and interact with each other. All right. I guess the last thing I should say about this is that this commentary space on the side is open for you to publish out into. You can publish out publicly, or you can publish out to small teams. My playing company is using this to build a dramaturgy stream with bits of passages of other adaptations of The Tempest. We're really obsessed by Aimé Césaire's Une Tempête right now, research they're doing on music in The Tempest, and so on. And so there's a dramaturgy comment stream that they're building their own apparatus into as we go. Sound, I guess I want to add, I'm not going to play it here because Kristen will, but it's part of a quiet set of accessibility features that unless you're somebody who, like I am, grew up with a family where there were a lot of different reading capacities, you might not notice. When the audio plays, a highlighting bar is going to run out from this little marker here, and it's going to move line by line. The text will scroll as the audio performs, keeping your eye and your ear on the same page. And there's really good evidence in the work on learning and on reading that that audio enhanced, that multi-perceptual reading is much deeper, much more intensive, and conveys a much richer sense of understanding of the text. I can validate that really vividly in my classroom when I compare the way my students talk about The Tempest with the ways they talk about the plays that we read that they're reading in codex form. They use the characters' names with comfort and facility in The Tempest. And The Tempest has characters that are pretty hard. Stefano, Sebastian, Trincolo, Alonso, Antonio, really easy to mix up and substitute. They also use the names of the critics. So in the commentary stream, they'll say, Visconti says, Poole says. By and large, I have a very bright, exciting classroom at Bryn Mawr, but I find them really often dropping into the third-person plural. I don't know if you notice that as well, to talk about what a critic might argue, or even what a speaker is saying in a play. They say, you taught me language, and my profit on it is I know how to curse, rather than Caliban says. And I take that as both an effect possibly of reading very fast under pressure, possibly of discomfort with unfamiliar language, and possibly with an attempt to make gender neutral by going to the third person plural. The attribution, the gesture of attribution. It's a complex set of reasons why they do that, but when we work with The Tempest, they very comfortably, authoritatively use characters' names. They quote the passage much more, the play and passages in the play much more often in their essays. So I've been counting quotes to kind of compare density of quotation in essays, and I get a higher hit rate in quotations with this text than I do with my codex text. And I think who knows how much my teaching is changing. That's obviously, this is not a scientific survey. This is anecdotal data that I'm gathering, but it's pretty vivid. The other things you'll notice from an accessibility point of view is that you can center any part of the text that you're actually working with. In other words, no passage appears at the turn of the page. It's scrollable. And that might seem trivial to us, but to somebody who's really working to focus on a difficult passage, it's incredibly powerful. As is the ability to type into that space there and get every student on the same line relatively quickly, much more quickly than if we're paging through to find an Act 4, Scene 2, a line. So that moment of gap or delay while they get together on the same line is really compressed. Most importantly, I think I want to say, we've made the text manipulable in multiple ways. So I showed you a little bit before. You can pop in a note where you want to. These sticky notes are exportable. Right now we're using Facebook as our proof of concept for social media exporting, but what we'd like to do downstream is to be working with Moodle and Sakai and the other open source course management platforms to be able to post out to a group if you want to. You can also keep a running set of notes of your own at the bottom of the page. Let's see if it'll open up for me and type in there. And I've used the word commonplacing several times here. We allow you to capture passages and collect them and then export them as sets. So this is my set of passages. I wonder why this is open. Go away. There we go. We'll hide that too. This is my set of passages for a classroom conversation that I did on The Tempest about the ways in which Miranda is the pivot figure between multiple male figures in the play. So I'm calling it Between Men. I sent them this set of passages as a group, and I said, tell me what are the principles of coherence that make this a collection. We've also done some wonderful commonplacing assignments. Once you begin to realize that these are not keywords, these tags that you create for yourself, but they can be, in fact, ideas, themes, problems that you're pursuing, like Between Men, you can begin to get them actively commonplacing for themselves, which I did in an assignment this year that was incredibly satisfying. Across the social networking platforms we use, they were duking it out with different passages with each other. No, that's not the peg that goes with that passage. We've also made it possible to collect, since this is a play, the roles by part, or the play by part. So this is Miranda's entire part. And then to add the cue lines if you want, which is fun for the actors, but also really interesting for the readers. This, of course, is a way of displaying the play that would have been familiar on the Renaissance stage. Probably the first written version of a play would have been an actor's role. Cue lines plus the lines for the part. And you notice as you scroll through this role that there's only 3 interlocutors for Miranda, right? And probably 85 to 90% of her discourse has Prospero as the initiating or cueing speaker. So this is a part that's visibly defined by its relationship to another part, intersubjectively defined in a way that's immediately really visible. The other one that I love is, let's find him, Antonio. So Antonio is the exciting part of the play, the Claudius part, the part that's going to be the really big antagonist part. And as we go, you find out that he's got a couple of really big scenes. Well, one really big scene, that's it. And then nothing, almost nothing. So this is a part manqué, a role that is truncated in a really interesting way as the play turns away from revenge tragedy and toward miraculous conclusion. And that's immediately visible to a student who's working with, or a reader who's working with just the part. I told you a little bit about the kinds of informal learning metrics that I'm using. Another one is just how deep do students go into this kind of play with the text. And usually I find that I need to guide them into one of these steps. They're not expecting the text to be dynamic. They're not expecting it to answer their abilities to manipulate. Once they have that, once they've started grabbing passages and exporting them, they do it quite fluently. But they're not, at least right now, students coming into the classroom are still not expecting to be able to have their text answer their needs this way, or the things that I'm asking for. I guess I'll close by saying where we're going next. Our most recent development sprint has to build a stamping production side that should make it possible for other teams of scholars to create apps themselves and at a relatively modest cost by comparison to current EPUB standards. And if we meet our fundraising goals, we're about to move into a second phase of fundraising. We're going to pivot off iOS to become platform agnostic. That's the next really significant development goal. I should say the story of A&M Records resonates with me, although I don't have any expectations of the kind of money that they made. But I really love the idea of a publishing in a new mode in a way that answers what the needs are of scholars and teachers. A long-term aim of this project is to find a way to relocate ourselves and our colleagues outside of the traditional publishing system that offered us very narrowly defined roles as receivers or deliverers of fixed scholarly content in established genres. As you can see, and as I think Kristen will talk a little bit, the app is exploring new genres, creating new genres. And I'm interested in exploring new kinds of relationships with readers. So I'm hoping to hear from you guys at the end how you might imagine using it and what you think it needs that you don't see here. With that, let me hand it over to Kristen. You want to keep tapping it so it doesn't go to sleep.
Okay. Great. Well, I also wanted to say, there's a lot of feedback up here, but I guess I know from experience you're not hearing it. I just want to say, first of all, also thanks to Kathy for bringing me in on this project. One of the things that has been just incredibly fun and in a way for me in my own scholarship really new is how this project has put me into collaborative relationships with a whole new network of people. I think I'm allowed to say this on film, but one of the criteria for people that we were sort of bringing in to be collaborators was that it was people we wanted to have a beer with. Should I not have said that on film? Kathy's giving me the... so, it's just there's a lot of people, across the entire country that I was able to meet with and work with very closely through doing this project. So it's just been a fantastic experience for me as a scholar. I wanted to speak more to what my own involvement in the project has been and just give you a little bit more of the content production side of it. So my involvement so far has been, I wrote one of the commentaries, the lecture streams for The Tempest that you just saw. I also wrote a stream for Othello, also downstream, as Kathy put it. Each one of those lecture streams, I don't know you quite got a sense of it, as Kathy was showing. So here we can go back to the experts. So each one of these scholars has written 12 mini lectures, sort of granular lectures of 500 words, maximum of 500 words, and they're distributed throughout the whole play. So I've done that for The Tempest and for Othello. And for Romeo and Juliet, I am what they're calling the director, which at first sounded, it's a reference to film production. It's like, well, how is a director different from being an editor? But I was sort of just thinking about it, it really was much more like directing than editing in many ways. As I was working with my contributors, there were conversations about voice, about content, about how so-and-so was responding to so-and-so. Part of my responsibility was to figure out, first of all, who I wanted on my team for my collaborators for Romeo and Juliet. And I really thought about, okay, well, what would be my dream team, not just in terms of personalities of scholars, but in terms of areas of expertise. So I gathered somebody who specializes in performance history. Kathy's going to do something on film. I have somebody who's an expert on the print history of the original play, somebody who does religious history. So, it's sort of really distributed throughout. And one feature of the text, as you come to these, you can also choose to track only certain scholars. So, as you saw earlier with Harry Berger's commentary, his was much more conversational. If that's what you really want, you keep him on. If that's not what you really want, you just click him off. So you can have a really sort of polyvocal way of experiencing the play, or you could have one person who's your guide, sort of taking you through it as you choose to activate or deactivate the different lectures. The thing that also I'll just say one thing that was also interesting for me, and again, I think this made it more film-like rather than anthology-like in terms of my work, was the lecture streams were not written simultaneously just because of the nature of how academics work. So one thing I've been doing is as I get a lecture stream in and get it into fairly decent shape, I can send that then to the next, to the other collaborators who haven't yet contributed their lecture streams. So they have the opportunity to respond to other lectures that people have already written. And then once I get 2 or 3 in, then I've been continuously sending them out to the people who are still writing. So you get genuine dialogue going on in that way, which I think has been kind of neat. So the way I approached the project was the first thing I sort of sat down and thought about was, well, I just need to think about how people read Shakespeare. And then I thought, well, what do I mean by people? And what do I mean by reading? And what do I need by Shakespeare? So I really had to spend some time thinking about who's going to read this, how are they going to read it. I'll get those guys off. So for people, I was imagining basically 3 different populations that I would think this would be really appealing to. High school students, college students, and the person I called Joe the architect. I'm not sure if Joe the plumber wants to read it, but I can easily imagine an architect on the subway who might think, I never really learned as much about Shakespeare as I want to. I'm on my commute home. Instead of reading the Times, why don't I get an app and start reading some Shakespeare? In terms of reading, I had to break it down to think about how people actually read and how I would like them to read, being aware that these two don't always correspond. Also being aware that I can't and don't actually want to shape how people read. But that said, I think part of the role of teaching is doing that work of guiding people and teaching them new ways to read it. So I was trying to be very sensitive to adapting to adapting to what I imagine to be reading practices, and also trying to direct and sort of sculpt a little bit how people might approach it. In that respect, I think that the teaching, my teaching experience was just invaluable for imagining how people read, because I've had 15 years of asking students how do they read this. I also have a piece, I've never published it, Hamlet the novel, where for years I was sort of hopping up and down that the students would turn in their essays and they talked about Hamlet the novel. It's not a novel, it's a play. And I had to really come to terms with, well, they're reading it like a novel. So rather than beat them with sticks to make them stop writing novel, See if I can get it to wake up. Let's just embrace what does it mean if they're reading Hamlet like a novel. So that also, I think, gave me some experience in imagining how they were going to be reading it. And then Shakespeare. What is Shakespeare? Are we talking 16th century author? Are we talking contemporary author? Is it text? Is it performance? Is it a cultural icon? Shakespeare in quotation marks? Is this a book? Is Shakespeare a book? Is Shakespeare a movie? These are all conversations that have been happening in Shakespeare studies for some time, but the app really made that manifest and real to me. I felt like, that was, these abstract concepts were really coming to bear on that. I've also been trying to think about my own reading as I've moved more and more to iPad reading. I've sort of become an addict. It's the first thing I turn on in the morning when I see what's going on in the Times, and it's the last thing I turn off at night when I'm reading on my Kindle app that I've got on there. I've sort of become attached at the hip. I've also been really fascinated in how I have an 8 and 11-year-old, 2 daughters, and just watching how they read and trying to get their understanding of reading is so radically different from mine. So I became very sensitive to what it actually means to read as I was doing this project in this format. So just in terms of breaking it down to the different people I was imagining, first there were the high school students. And as I know from teaching, high school students have radically different experiences, past experience with reading Shakespeare. There's a huge discrepancy in that. So I was thinking, first of all, they want to be reading for content, just becoming familiar with the story. I wanted to make the story accessible to them without them having to go to SparkNotes or something like that, or to go to outside summaries. So part of my goal was to be able to have them actually read the text and, make the story really present. I was thinking of balancing out descriptive lectures with historical and close reading. So there's sort of a range of this is what's going on in the play, as well as interpretive lectures. I also was wanting them to be more comfortable with the language. I wanted it to be accessible, but not Shakespeare Made Easy, which is a series that a lot of high schools use, where it's modernized, really kind of horrifically modernized Shakespeare stories. So there were many comments on words and trying to get students to think more closely about the language. The other thing was I was hoping that this would cause students to read the play more quickly. I've become aware that in a lot of high schools, scenes are taught maybe week by week, which to my mind is a little bit like watching an episode of Downton Abbey 5 minutes a week for the course of a semester. I just don't see how that doesn't kill the story and just the narrative drive of the play. So I think the app is a great way to read in a way that sort of pushes them forward. The commentaries are actually let me just demonstrate the audio so you can get a sense. Kathy was talking about this before. It's just going to take a second to think about it.
Just tap the text. There you go. Go away.
There we go. So you can just see. I'm going to have to move the microphone down. But you can see we're just going to do this one little speech by Caliban, and you can see how the soundtrack tracks along with the text.
Thou takest from me. When thou camest first, thou strokest me and made much of me. Would give me water with berries in't, and teach me how to name the bigger light, and how the less that burn by day and night. And then I loved thee, and showed thee all the qualities of the isle, the fresh springs, the brine pits, and barren place, and fertile. Cursed be I that did so! All the charms of sycorax, toads, beetles, bats light on you. For I am all the subjects that you have, which first was mine own king. And here you stye me in this hard rock, whilst you do keep from me the rest of the island. Thou most lying slave.
Okay. So, you can really get a sense of how that would propel you through the play as a reader. I also wanted to have commentaries that were not just footnotes, but really conversational and explanatory. Like I was saying before, sort of imagining someone sitting next to you and explaining the play as you went along, a different feel from just having textual notes. For college students, some of them need the same thing that the high school students need, if they didn't get that in high school. But I think one of the things that the app gives to students who are a little bit more comfortable with the language is great opportunities for rereading. That's what I always try to say. High school you learn how to read Shakespeare. College you learn how to reread Shakespeare. There's the ability to activate the commentaries on a first read, or you can just keep going and come back to them and really engage with the lectures more substantively. There's a greater focus, I think, for college students on the language versus just the story. Again, a lot of close reading is happening in some of those particular little lectures. There's a lot of focus on historical content and theoretical issues going on in there. And I also think that for college students, there hopefully is a greater awareness of how the medium is shaping the message. Because you're reading in a new platform, hopefully making people more aware of their own reading experiences, becoming, sort of self-aware of how the iPad is changing it. And I think that could lead to really interesting conversations and making students more attuned to how early reception was altered by print format. In the interest of time, I'm not going to show it, but there's also a great little feature here. There's a little video on the printing press from the Folger Shakespeare Library. So even though you're teaching from this, digital platform, you can actually go back and talk about, well, what did it mean when, these first texts were printed, or when the texts were first printed on the printing press. And the other thing I really like is a greater, I'm hoping that students would have a greater awareness of interpretation, which I think is something really unique that this offers that most standard textbooks of Shakespeare don't, because it's polyvocal, because you have those multiple perspectives. Sometimes clustering, sometimes we had a little bit of a logjam and I had to tell people, go somewhere else in the text, because everybody would go to the same text. But I think there were a lot of moments where you had really fruitful dialogues happening between the different commentators. For Joe the Architect, or Josephine the Architect, I'm hoping that this really can keep the pleasure element. That, one of the things that we needed to struggle with as commentators was to make really clear the stakes of academic, debates that are happening right now in terms of academic discussions. Why does that matter? And to be able to convey that really clearly and really crisply to, the educated lay reader. Why is a particular historical reference interesting, for example? I also was imagining that Josephine the Architect was going to be doing granular reading. She's not under a deadline. She's not in a classroom. And she's probably reading it more the way I read novels on my Kindle, which is, there's no pages, so maybe 1% at a time. Just in little bits here and there. So I was trying to make it really accessible in that way. I think the genre lends itself to that, but so that if you picked it up, if you only have 10 minutes you pick up, or 5 minutes, that it's something that you can keep coming sort of back inside of. So the lectures needed to be really self-standing and interesting in little bite-sized bits, even though each one is a stream, so it has thematic continuity running through the whole thing. And then the last little feature that I think it would be really interesting for college students and more advanced readers is this feature called Audio Plus. And there's a number of places within the play where the actors did alternate takes and alternate interpretations. So here's that speech by Caliban. I'm looking at a lot of people from the English department, so I'm not going to explain who Caliban is. He was a native inhabitant of the island before it was taken over. And the speech that you just heard, he's a little plaintive, sort of resentful, but is a much weaker character. If you play the alternate recording, you hear a much different version of Caliban.
I must eat my dinner. This island's mine by Sycorax my mother, which thou takest from me. Oh, when thou camest first, thou strokest me and made much of me. Would give me water with berries in't, and teach me how to name the bigger light and how the less that burn by day and night. And then I loved thee, and showed thee all the qualities of the isle, the fresh springs, brine pits, barren place, and fertile. Cursed be I that did so. All the
Okay. So you could kind of get a sense of that. I think the lessons learned, at least the lessons I learned, first of all, writing for this platform was much more difficult than I had anticipated. Getting things down into these little, 500 words is a platform limit, so there was no way around it. It had to be really, really small and very crisp, very clear. It was very rewarding work, but definitely challenging. There's a reason also that everybody's called an expert. I thought a really important point was that the genre is not a replacement for traditional scholarship. That, in fact, it's only possible because every one of our commentators has done traditional scholarship and has been in the classroom for a long time. So it's all of that knowledge and experience that allows went into the app. So what the app is not, it's not a book, it's not an essay anthology, it's not a conversation, and it's not a classroom. But it uses all of the skills that we use in those different arenas. It's not a book, but it required the deep knowledge necessary for writing a book, or that you gain in writing a book. For example, a deep knowledge of history to be able to really select and compress information. There's also some really innovative and excellent analyses going on in these lectures. I think scholars would be really interested in it too. It's not an essay, but it requires that same kind of crystal clear, economical, really packed writing. Every one of these commentators is a master stylist and rhetorician. It's not a conversation, but like I was talking about, the lectures cross-reference each other. And I think it models the way that academic conversations are collective knowledge-creating process. I think that's crucial. And it's also not a classroom, but it's a culmination of a lot of classroom experience. Just, teaching Shakespeare year in and year out, you figure out, students really responded to this scene or to this passage. And something else, sometimes they just kind of fall on the floor with a big thud. Students aren't interested. So I think what a lot of us did was just sort of picked our best classroom moments that we've developed over the years. It's not replacing books or conversations or classrooms or performance, but it's supplementing and shaping all of these in different ways. I think it prepares students for conversations and classrooms and performances. Joe Architect going to see a play of The Tempest. This would be a great way to prepare somebody for that. I think it models interpretation and intellectual exchange. And I think it gives students or the public a sense of the depth and liveliness of literary scholarship. I wouldn't say it's the anti-Wikipedia, but it's not about fact but dialogue. And I don't know that there are that many other places where you get that emphasis. So that was what I had to say. Yes, if people have questions. Yes.
They'll be happy to entertain questions from people. I'd like to start by just asking you to go back to the screen with the set of images, right, where it's like contributors and whatnot. So it's like
the honeycomb.
The honeycomb. We're calling this the honeycomb.
Yeah. So what is it called?
We're calling it a honeycomb, and it's like a really nerdy classical reference behind it to the labor of bees producing sweetness, which is a long-standing figure for the labor of scholars.
Can you just sort of tell us what those?
So the play sits in the center. Yes.
Yeah.
Kristen showed you the experts. That's where we're collecting the people that we, whose work we're including here. And I should have said earlier on, we did Unicode development so that the app can be multilingual. One of my long-term goals, Alex Huang's commentary is both in Chinese and in English. He's mixed them, well, alternated them. And one of our long-term goals is to build a fairly rich array of multilingual apparatuses around a single play, probably not the play itself. There's a collection of terms of use and so on is all here in the Classic About section, and that's really quite robust because we were working hard to build a set of practices that don't have obvious corollaries already. How do you cite this app, for example? This is a set of links. Right now it's going to be more robust, I hope. Various kinds of essays that you can hop out to, some of which are live in various places. And in the long run, probably, you can see that I hopped out already to, that link points straight to our web page. So it's not actually sitting inside the app. Although it's relatively easy, most of this is quite dynamic. One of the lovely things about authoring in this environment is if you decide you really need to change what you said about the way Kenneth Branagh used Caliban's passage in the Olympics in 2012, you can go right into the authoring environment and tinker with your commentary, and the next time somebody hits update, your new commentary is published. Or if you find an egregious error or something changes. The workshop is the place where we collect all the material that you have created yourself. So you can hop in and find all your notes, your collection of commonplaces and so on in one place, and grab them and export them. And preferences is the standard set of functions that you do when you're, for example, joining a social media group, note-sharing group, or getting sick of our help messages. Working with, keep track of what build we are here. Because I'm working with, I particularly need that last application version because I'm often working with builds that the developers are playing around with. I have 2 different versions of this on my iPad. Oops, sorry. Did I give you everything there? Oh, resources. Resources collects the multimedia, the video, the audio, so that you can move to all the Audio Plus sections. We also have a wonderful set of duets. We cross-cast. This is an audio production with actors from the London stage, which you may know as the group that circulates rising actors in the RSC and other London playing companies. And so Patrick Stewart started out there. Fiona Shaw started out there. This production uses 5 actors, and it begins with Jennifer Kidd playing one of the mariners. So all the way through, it's cross-casting in interesting ways, but we also played around with some of the main speeches. So this is the famous Shakespearean Margaret Garber, the famous theater historian Joseph Roach, taking turns being Ariel and Prospero in the famous scene in which Ariel converts Prospero to mercy. We've got another set coming. It's just been really hard to edit those, and so we'll gradually publish those out. My favorite is when they take turns playing Ferdinand and Miranda, and that's coming soon. And let's see. And then this is a gallery that Peter Holland and I wrote together of working its way through images in the Folger Shakespeare Library and thinking about what it means to how looking works on the Shakespeare stage. So we're using the Folger's archives to think about vectors of looking and dynamics of looking in the Shakespeare theater. So that's, I think, the whole set of things. I won't play the video for you, but there's also a video sitting in there. I don't know what I'm doing here. Back. Yes. A crazy, lovely little video that I greatly admire that walks you through how a book is made in the Renaissance. This is a play that's about books and bookness. That's one of the reasons why we chose it as our launch play, because we wanted a little bit of reflection to be possible on the history of bookmaking with this text itself. Thanks. Yes, in the back.
I have 2 questions that's really interesting about the social aspects of using this, and one in the classroom. So far, has it been the setting that all the students have their iPad and you sort of talk together and everybody moves to the same point? Are you hooked into any central learning stations for projection of that? Like, we have these new workstations downstairs where, I don't know, describe it right, people can put their laptops in
Yeah.
and it's centrally projected.
Yeah, we don't have that at Bryn Mawr. We have what I call, I guess, flights of iPads that you can check out for a number of weeks for a classroom. I would say probably maybe 15 to 20% of my students have iPads or some other mobile device, tablet device. So not by no means the majority of them. Although I'm seeing a significant uptick in that for some of the reasons I said earlier. We have a large proportion of international students, and for them it is the mobile device of choice because it's so much less expensive than a laptop and just lighter to travel with a nice little keyboard. So mostly we're working with, I've checked out for 3 weeks or whatever, 25 iPads from our library, and we're using them all together. And we don't have, we have this kind of projection capacity, but not what you describe.
So like the student couldn't push everybody to looking at the same thing they're looking at. They would just by conversation say, you know.
Oh, go listen to this. Oh yeah, there was a great moment a couple of weeks ago in my, with my playing troupe, where we all started playing different parts of the Mariners' Exchanges. Oh dear, I think that's me. Do you want to just grab it for me? Turn it off, thanks, Kristen. You'll have to change this part of the video. They all started playing different parts of the Mariners' Exchanges together, and suddenly the room was filled with a whole lot of Mariners yelling at each other cacophonously. It was fantastic. So there are some advantages to having a single device that's shared. We're going to be traveling, and so this is going to be a way for us to be storing a lot of the kind of material that they're building for the production out of, in integrated with the play. I mean, really, as you will have seen, I think, a really important genre decision is that the commentaries are attached to passages of the play. And so they touch down in, you know, some of them are really quite short, some of them are longer, but they touch down in specific passages, and you move to that passage when you move to a commentary and back and forth. And so it's actually really nice. It's a wonderful tool for collecting our own ideas.
So the other sort of social aspect I was thinking of in terms of your audience is I would never underestimate Joe the plumber, especially in the world of book clubs that reach.
Oh yes, that is an aspiration, is book clubs and trade. Yes.
You know, I think reaching out through public libraries or any other number of different types of circles that get together. And,
We've had a couple of conversations with trade publishers, and that's exactly what they're most interested in. Yeah. And, you know, reading is, they say, and I think rightly, we pick up books by word of mouth. The primary way that books are sold, this is a major publisher's senior officer said this to me, books are sold by word of mouth. And Amazon has been so successful because it built an algorithm that simulated word of mouth, and that using its collaborative filtering engine. There are other reasons why it's been successful, but that's a crucial part of the book selling success of Amazon, and yet books are still sold by word of mouth, and we learn from each other what we're reading. I just gave Julian a suggestion for his son, right? And that's how books travel. So the book club opportunity is a really significant one, I think. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
I was curious about if you were tempted to excerpt from seminal or classic critiques of the plays. I mean, it's great to have new criticism, but, and I saw you have a bibliography. I saw Stanley Kubrick. I don't know.
Oh, Stanley Kubrick is. I'm so sorry. Stanley Kubrick is left over there because he was our test persona when we were starting to test the authoring environment. I haven't taken him out. I'm so sorry. What a tease. I have thought about that. Right now, teaching with Césaire, I desperately want chunks of Césaire in French and in English sitting right alongside, particularly the exchange that Kristen just showed you with Caliban. Césaire's Caliban is in conversation with Shakespeare, and maybe could be thought of as, this is what Caliban would say if Caliban grew up during, the period of great Pan-African movements in the middle of the 20th century. And so it's not that he says things that belong to Shakespeare's Caliban, but in ways that you wouldn't see unless you'd read Césaire. I think Césaire has been incredibly important in creating an understanding of this play since the mid-20th century. So, yeah, I desperately want... there are things like that I do want, and we just haven't... that hasn't been... We're working so hard on building the next phase of the business that we're not really ready to think about the next phase of content expansion. Yeah, right now. Both of us work full-time, so this is... right now, this is a company that we are running in development. We're doing on top of our jobs and our parenting and so on. So it's exciting. It's really exciting. I guess I should say something really quickly about working with software developers. That has been one of the great pleasures of the last year and a half for me, discovering that software developers find me a good partner because I have been trained for 20 years to do something they really value, which is describe verbally and in writing very, very precisely what readers and writers do. And their attentiveness to, and their penetrating questions about my descriptions of what a reader or a writer might do at any given moment, really following what Kristen just gave you was use cases in software parlance, yeah? That discovering that I could be a good partner because of the training that I had has been really exciting. Plus, I love working at their pace. If it's not done by Monday, it's not getting it into the build. So get it done by Monday. That's not how I'm used to working as a scholar, but it's been exhilarating. There was a question way at the back.
Yeah, I would love to hear both of you guys. I mean, it's been a great talk. Thank you so much for doing this. I would love to hear you talk more about these issues around the range of voices and having some of the commentators speak in a much more kind of contemporary rather than expert scholar kind of voice. And I didn't, as you talked us through the design of the beehive, I didn't see anywhere where you actually talked, there's a place for you two to talk about your editorial practices as the designers, as the film directors.
That's so interesting. We have a note on the text. So our editor, who prepared this text, has that place. But no, we didn't do that, and we should. That's missing. I love that. I'll say one thing really quickly, and then I'm going to hand it over to Kristen and let her answer that question. Unlike a print text, in Shakespeare's studies, print texts are market-specific because readers have different needs. What's happening here is custom publishing. In two senses. You can publish out what you need to it. I mean, I could put my Césaire in there. I am putting some Césaire in there because it's just going to my class. It's not being published publicly. The other ways in which it's custom publishing is that the user or the teacher can say, download these commentaries, focus on them first. And that's a fundamental shift in the way that Shakespeare has been printed and marketed. The chief obstacle of which is, there are two. One is producing the expert framework, and the other is printing it in objects. And so this is a movement that we're still trying to feel our way around. So I'll let Kristen answer that in a substantive way.
Yeah, is that Anne back there again? So your question is, to some degree, about maybe different hypothesized audiences that different scholars are writing for. And that was something that when I was doing Romeo and Juliet, that was also something that there's a whole lot of letting go in a project like this. And as things were coming in, if you say to somebody, write for a hypothesized, intelligent, lay, by which I mean non-academic audience, it was fascinating for me to see how people conceptualized that audience. And some of them wrote very colloquially. I could, imagine it very comfortable tone for, say, a high school student. Some of them wrote really very subtle and very abstract lectures, but in a vocabulary that might be a little bit more accessible. And I thought that was just part of the fun. And again, I think that was where that customizing of which voices you want to follow is really important. So I did make some, when I went back to the contributors, I did make some director comments. This needs to be maybe a little bit more user-friendly. One thing I had to do ruthlessly was chop up everybody's sentences. We write in very long sentences, and you realize the length of a sentence, it fills the whole screen. And the way I practiced was reading the Tempest app before I went to go do Romeo and Juliet, just to see what was my own experience of reading. And it was really annoying to have a sentence, if you have really long sentences, they don't fit on the platform.
This space here. It's a narrow column.
Yeah, so in terms of style, I mean, there was stuff like that I had to do, but there's huge variety, I would say, in terms of both tone and I wouldn't say sophistication of the commentaries, but maybe the complexity of I mean, they're all working on, very, very high levels, but some of the concepts that are being conveyed are really much more complex than others. So I just let it go. I just thought, well, this is where we have this range of readers, and people can start gravitating towards the ones that really speak to them more. I don't know if that was for Jasmine had a question too.
Yeah, I'm interested in whether or not you see a place for pedagogical applications and models on the site itself. So ways that you've used it in your classroom, just a reason, and maybe even in the resources section as it's available in the Honeycomb. That would be, here are some ways that you can use it in classroom. Here's what we've done. Here's what worked. And it could be either socially constructed or something that the editors or directors do. And then my other question is somewhat related. If you're envisioning a high school audience as well, and if, as you say, teachers are using this in their classrooms, have you had high school teachers on board as part of the process, or professors of education who are familiar with some of the concerns of that level of reading and of dealing with text?
Yes, actually early on we presented this at the Folger Shakespeare Library to a group of expert or master high school teachers and got their feedback and thinking about how they would use it, and included them and a bunch of their assignments. So this Folger Masterclass stream is a mix of high school and college assignments, that have been shifted given what those teachers were interested in. So here's when an actor approaches a part, his or her preparation involves a host of choices about character motivation. The verbal richness and denseness of Shakespeare's lines requires actors to make decisions. So how can you understand that? This assignment uses Audio Plus to understand that by comparing this two key moments of Prospero's speech. Prospero here is, first, as Dale Rapley imagined him, a protective, nurturing father, and second, as we asked Dale to do, a domineering tyrant. And the choices that Dale makes in where he settles in this passage, wonderfully interesting passage, to shift those interpretations are in 15 seconds you can hear them really, really clearly. So this assignment asks the students to read with a pencil and listen with a pencil in hand and write out the words where you hear Dale making changes. And then read Dale's lecture stream about Prospero. Read and think about what was the strategy behind the decisions that Dale made, and then bring that back. So there's a set of probably about a dozen assignments like this embedded. This is an assignment about cross-casting and Ariel, who's the great, wonderfully cross-cast, his long history of cross-casting. This is an assignment about antithesis that uses the My Path selections for students to grab halves of antitheses. They're working with a partner. Each of them grabs a half of an antithesis, and they make a collection for one half. You get the first half, I get the second half. And then look at that collection and watch how negative and positive valences trade back and forth. So there's not, if you get a series of antitheses in a scene, often Shakespeare will work back and forth between the negative and the positive, between the different halves, or do something more complex than that. So assignments like that are built in, yes. And I think there's huge capacity for more. We looked for the features of this app and what teachers could use it to do that they're already really interested in doing.
I also have one of my commentators is a high school teacher.
Yes, I should
And
have
the
said
other
that
thing-
as
you know
well.
what? The other thing we didn't really mention is that a lot of the,
Move to the mic.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I don't know if this has been stated explicitly, but some of the commentators are actors.
Yes.
So they're also writing on the experience of performing it. I don't have that yet for Romeo and Juliet because we don't have the audio going yet. But yeah, so
Right.
there's also that angle.
So actors, high school teachers, scholars, the editor. The idea was to, that's why we're calling them experts. The idea is to bring in expertise from very different vantage points on convening around the play. Yeah. Yes, there's a question over here. You? Yes.
Yes, you mentioned something about whenever the reader updates. Tell us about the download app update.
Okay, well, so the difference, to my mind, the fundamental difference between a book and an app is that you can never put an app on the shelf. You have to, because iOS systems and platforms keep changing, you have to have a company behind the app releasing upgrades and also making the changes that you might want to make to take advantage of the fact that it's ongoing. This is, originally I came into this kind of development very deeply attached to free and open source resources for the classroom. And after 5 years of watching digital humanities projects fall by the wayside that I thought were very deserving, that could not keep an ongoing funding stream to stay alive, I began to think really hard about what was going to be, what would make this sustainable. And the goal is to have a small, a steady, viable revenue stream that's going to keep this going. That was behind our decision to, because we don't have endlessly deep pockets, to have a small commercial company. So one of the kinds of upgrades, basically, if you have an iPad, your app tells you, or the App Store will tell you that you need to do updates. And we have push notification that can say, hey, great new Ferdinand and Miranda duet in here with Garber and Roach. So there's at least those two ways that you can reach out. And then some of the updating you push yourself. For example, when you want to add or take away a lecture stream, you just choose to remove or download. Most of what you're looking at sits on the tablet. This is a fundamental difference between tablets and laptops with rich content like this, where if we were navigating this on the web, we would be looking at content that sits on the web that you have to be wired or wireless to have access to. Almost all of the content sits on your tablet, so you don't have to be wired or wireless to be able to read the play and listen to the play.
You say that the updates are free too.
Oh, and the updates are free. That's, once you buy it, they keep coming.
And sort of a follow-up to that, you were saying something about one of the experts might decide to, oh, I shouldn't have said this, I now feel that. What if that was like some reader's favorite thing and now it's changed?
I know. Then you'd have to email Kristen Poole and tell her what a mistake she made. So this is one of the differences with traditional print and electronic print. And we have just, Kristen said, you let things go. I think of it in terms of gains and losses. The gain is that you can make changes. The loss is that this is not permanent. But that's to move into this world is to begin to grapple with that. And mostly, scholars don't want to make changes. We love things to be done. We love to put things down. The more that I work with the more I do digital humanities projects, the more I'm deeply aware of how much it's wonderful to be done with things. And so there's actually, I think, not a super large risk of what you're describing on that particular example, but there may be others. There was another question in the back I saw, yes.
I like the way you started with the clean, quiet text, but then it is really fun to see the engagement and the potential to do different things with it. And as a follow-up to your questions about the voices and the commentary and the experts, I wondered if you considered literally making them talking heads. So so that they actually
Yes,
become a
absolutely did.
dialogue. And I think that might especially appeal to the solitary Joe architect reader who, like, actually would like to hear a conversation.
Well, I would say that is the decision that Touch Press has made. I don't know if you know, there's Sonnet's app with Arden, or the Wasteland app with Faber and Faber, and that is a Talking Heads app. When I say there are some really marvelous ebooks on the market that don't do what we're doing here, that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about. We decided not to do that. Because we were looking to aim at a social reading experience, not a vision of the reader as user. We were looking at the iPad not only as a media delivery device. And that Talking Heads version of the app, although it's amazing to hear Fiona Shaw read The Wasteland, she's incredible. But that still, to my mind, is thinking about the app as a media delivery device and the reader as user. And we are really thinking hard about the reader as maker, the reader as writer.
So I was just talking about the expert commentary, not the whole read.
Yeah, but even so, I mean, I feel the same way about that. In other words, and I don't, amazing as some of those artists are, I actually don't think this tablet is great as a media delivery device. I think it's pretty great as a reading device. But the little tiny heads talking are, I don't know, maybe it's a generational thing. I should really ask our students whether they want that, and we'd get a much better answer.
There is also, the director's commentary is audio recorded.
Yes.
So if you wanted one person, Joe the architect wants one person who's going to say, be talking rather than just reading, there is one hard-coded commentary in there already.
And I'm game for the idea that all of them get audio coded. I feel very differently about audio than I do about video, because I think it's possible to read text and listen to audio in quite a robust way, whereas it's very hard to read text and watch video at the same time. And so many of our decisions had to do with allowing the reader to settle into a textual moment in a richer way, rather than pulling the reader's eyes or attention off that textual moment. That we don't have a lot of hyperlinks, for example, in citations and so on, for exactly that reason. Any other questions? We probably have time for one more. Yes, is that right? I don't know what your end time usually is.
Time for another question.
But if we've fulfilled and satisfied, then that's fine too. Yeah. So what's the text that you want to build?
Macbeth.
Yeah, that's mine. I agree. I think Paradise Lost. Maybe a Verdi opera. Yeah. Othello. That's coming soon. We hope. That would be very fun. Yes. No, I have an Anglo-Saxonist that I'm in conversations with. One conversation so far. Hopefully she'll call back. And then actually there's some really great performances that one could partner around, no question.
Well, I'm very curious to know, so you direct two things on campus, and then you got involved into this, so either you've got really bad judgment and don't know how to say no, or...
Spoken like an administrator.
How did you get... Can you just tell us the nutshell version of how you went from being, the teacher scholar to somebody who became an entrepreneur and really dedicated a substantial amount of energy to something like this?
Well, one answer is that, as Kristen said, this draws very deeply on what I do and know how to do. And so I am often thinking, I don't want to say in parallel, but I'm thinking about how my students are reading as I'm teaching, and I have been for 20 years, and I'm thinking about that when I'm doing this. And so one answer is that some of the really important parts of the work are already done, and I'm drawing on them. Another answer is that I wish I had more time. I've had, another answer is that I have amazing collaborators. And people that I really not just want to have beers with, but trust very deeply to frame a question or a problem to, and then have them drive the answer to it. And that's true with the software development team, with my partner Elliot. That's been an incredible partnership, where that depends on a lot of communication time and handing off of tasks. I think the most difficult challenge has been the learning of new genres. And there I mean things like building a slide deck for an investor presentation. That's not, I use PowerPoint, but building an investor slide deck is a mode of storytelling that's quite powerful and very specific in its requirements and understanding of audience. And I'm learning that with the help of a really wonderful business advisor that is working with the two of us, Elliot and me. So the short answer is that I don't have enough time. If I did, we'd be farther downstream in the next set of editions. And that one goal is to be able to maybe get to a place where one of us can buy out time and work on this full time. And then I think those are the three answers. An amazing family. My kids are older now. I couldn't have done this when they were young. So they're 20 and almost 18. And that has made it possible. They've been incredibly understanding, as has my spouse. He's an engineer and a business consultant. So I also have in-house expertise that's incredibly helpful. And then I live with a family of, I grew up with a family of entrepreneurs. So I guess I got dragged into this. I resisted as long as I could. Maybe that's the real answer. And very supportive administrators. My provost has been incredible, actually. So it's all about the administrators.
Yeah, right. Well, join me in thanking you.